Hello everyone. Uh, in the last lecture, I talked about important developments of the first week of March. In this lecture, I would be covering a special issue today. Uh, but first week of March has been very happening as far as IR current affairs is concerned. And right at the beginning, before I start my lecture, I would like to clarify that you may feel burdened because of the content that we are seeing in this week, but this is not the case always. I know that students have this kind of uh, understanding that IR is a small topic as far as GS4 papers are concerned. Nevertheless, important, which carries some 45 50 marks. And we need to understand that IR requires a lot of reading. And I'm bringing a lot of condensed kind of information for all of you, covering different articles, right? In this week it may look a little bit burdensome, but don't be worried about it because it's not that in every week such kind of things happen. In this week there has been a development which has been very important, which has transformed the global geopolitics like anything. This week has been happening, and what has happened in this week may have consequences for upcoming weeks. And I'm talking about the war that is going on in the Gulf. US and Israel attacked Iran, and that was the trigger point. In the first lecture, I covered important developments. In this lecture, I will be covering this war. Uh, Understand that in the last lecture, in the first lecture, rather, I have briefly talked about this conflict. Let us now analyze it in detail. If you get a 15 marker or 10 marker on this question, this information can help you a lot. And this can also help deeper analysis, which is required for PSIR optional, right? So let's discuss today the special topic, that is US Israel Iran war. Right. Uh, Deliberately, I have combined code names of US and Israel to create this title, which looks interesting. Epic Fury of Roaring Lion. USA named this operation, code named this operation as Operation Epic Fury, whereas Israel code named it as Roaring Lion. That's why I just combined that Epic Fury of Roaring Lion. Let us first try and understand what has happened in terms of introduction. I have done that in the last lecture, but just to give some additional information. So, no doubt, one of the most consequential geopolitical developments in West Asia in recent years. In recent times, such kind of development has not happened, which has been now very consequential for the upcoming weeks, months, maybe, right? This was joint US Israel military strikes on Iran. That was a trigger point. Reported killing of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and uncertain future of Islamic Republic. Um, C. Raja Mohan talked about regime seduction as far as what US did with Venezuela. The President Maduro was sort of captured with a strike, and he was taken to US. That was called regime seduction, but this is a clear case of regime change. What kind of regime change are we talking about? Uh, this is a regime change of different kind as compared to say what happened in Afghanistan, what happened in Iraq. Iraq in 2003, Afghanistan in 2001. Saddam Hussein was clearly removed. US entered the country. Taliban was clearly removed. US entered the country. This attempt at regime change is a bit different in the sense US has not entered the country. It has preferred aerial strikes, in fact, surgical strike to remove the top leadership and then expect people to go against the top leader and sort of go for a coup to overthrow the regime. So, sort of creating enabling environment for regime change and then wait for the regime change. But somehow that has not happened. And we'll discuss that in detail how regime change is a complex phenomenon. What Trump has tried to do is, without entering Iran on ground, destabilize it by removing top brass of leadership and then expect that people would go for the regime change. Let's analyze that. First of all, let's look at the developments, then we will come to the analysis. Over a single weekend, the United States Israel launched sweeping military campaign. Within a week, they have planned, rather executed this campaign, right? So I have talked about this. They gave the code name Epic Fury and Roaring Lion, US and Israel respectively. Targets were Tehran, Isfahan, Qom, Karaj, and other cities in Iran. This operation occurred barely 2 days after US-Iran nuclear negotiations in Geneva. That is very interesting. Very interesting kind of development. Negotiations were going on. Negotiations were concluded, mediated by Oman, and Oman clearly said that it looks positive. And at that time itself, Trump had said that he was not happy. But anyways, within couple of days of the negotiations, this attack came in, right? So it appeared close to breakthrough. It looked like this tension would be diffused, but nothing of that sort has happened. In fact, it has uh, escalated to a full-blown war, right? The central question now before us is this beginning of regime change in Iran or the start of prolonged regional instability? What is in store for Iran, for the West Asian region, for the world? We don't know, but these two look like possibilities, right? First, beginning of regime change, because uh, the supreme leader Khamenei has been removed. Now, what will happen in coming days? We have to look for what will be the possibilities. We will discuss that as well going forward. Then, start of prolonged regional instability. This looks like a more probable kind of consequence because what will happen in case of regime change, we cannot comment on that as of now. Even scholars hesitate to comment on that. They talk about possibilities. But one possibility that looks certain, at least for some weeks, months maybe, is this one. Start of a prolonged regional instability. Start of a period of prolonged regional instability. Before we go into what is happening right now, what are different dimensions of the conflict, what is the deeper analysis that you are supposed to put in, what is India's foreign policy response so far. Before we do all these things, let us look at some kind of a background, because unless you understand the background, it's not possible to understand what is happening today. Let's have a quick overview of the background of Iran and US relations, the regime in Iran, because this is clearly an attempt at regime change. So, before we talk about what is changing, we need to understand what was there in the existence. Let's talk about the regime that came into existence, which was sought to be removed by US in this week. Let's talk about that regime when it came into existence. Historical context. 1979 Islamic Revolution was the revolution which gave rise to the current regime, right? I would be brief in terms of historical review that would give you idea as to what has happened, and then we'll quickly come to the current situation. To understand today's crisis, we must revisit 1979. Please understand the content that I bring is from different articles. And C. Raja Mohan wrote an article in Indian Express. That is one source, and there is another source. So, couple of articles, two, three articles, I combine and come up with this kind of content, right? So, Raja Mohan clearly outlined the background to the conflict, background of the regime here. So, based on that, you can see this information. So today's crisis, to understand today's crisis, we must revisit 1979. That is what C. Raja Mohan clearly says. The Iranian Revolution overthrew Pahlavi monarchy. So there was a monarchy before Islamic Revolution of 1979 that was overthrown by this revolution. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. So the current Khomeini, right, who was removed, rather killed in the, reportedly killed in the US-Israel attacks. Before him, the first supreme leader was Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. He established Islamic Republic, and this was the result of the Islamic Revolution that we're talking about. A new political model emerged, replacing the previous monarchical model. A new regime emerged, that is clerical supremacy under a supreme leader. So, going forward, a committee was created of religious experts, right? Religious leaders. That is called clerical kind of group. Clerical supremacy over entire political system, led by supreme leader, and supreme leader was also a cleric, right? So that's how that regime came into existence. This revolution at systemic level. When we say systemic level, from PSIR point of view, we know that we are referring to Kenneth Walls' analysis, framework of analysis, where it divides into systemic, regional level, and national level. When we say, systemic, national, and leadership level. When we say systemic, it has got two types: global systemic level and regional systemic level. What it means is any factor which impacts entire world, that is called a global systemic factor. A factor that impacts entire region, that is called regional systemic factor, right? These are two systemic factors. Next level is national level analysis, where national factors many times have bearing on foreign policy. And third level is individual leadership level factor. Sometimes an individual, like Donald Trump, you can say, and number of other examples are there, positive and negative both. When leader impacts the foreign policy to a large extent, that is called leadership level factor. So we are trying to analyze what happened after Islamic Revolution at the systemic level. See, it altered regional power balances with the emergence of Islamic Republic of Iran, right? Regional balance of power changed uh, in Middle East, right? And within a few years, we see in the decade of 1980s a long drawn Iran-Iraq war, right? It reshaped global energy politics. Since then, we know that there were oil shocks in 70s and 80s as a result of this instability, right? It challenged American dominance in West Asia. Please understand, during Cold War, West Asia was to a large extent controlled by USA, right? And Islamic Revolution was, in a way, a challenge to US dominance in West Asia. This is the rationale as to why we see Iran, US now looking at each other as enemies, right? The Shah of Iran, that is Pahlavi monarchy Shah, was a friend, was an ally of US, but now he was removed and Khomeini came in power. He challenged US dominance in West Asia. And that is why you see the beginning of enmity between US and Iran ever since that Islamic Revolution happened in Iran. As scholar C. Rajamohan argues, 1979 revolution, along with Soviet intervention in Afghanistan, reshaped India's regional political security landscape. Very important developments of late 1970s and then 1980s. I would explain this a bit. Soviet Union intervened in Afghanistan in order to protect the communist regime in Afghanistan, which was on the verge of collapse, in the sense on the verge of overthrow. Afghan Mujahideen groups were created, right, as rebel groups in Afghanistan, supported by USA through Pakistan. And Afghan Mujahideen groups were about to overthrow the communist regime in Afghanistan. In order to save that communist regime, Soviet Union intervened militarily in Afghanistan in 79, right? And the same time, we were observing Islamic Revolution in Iran. These two things happened simultaneously. And going forward, in the decade of 1980s, on one hand, we see Iran-Iraq war. On the other hand, we see uh, uh, the Soviet military intervention continuing in Afghanistan, the conflict between Afghan Mujahideens and Soviet forces. Eventually, in 1988-89, Soviet Union withdrew its forces from Afghanistan. Afghanistan plunged into a civil war, and in a few years in the 90s, out of the civil war among different Afghan Mujahideen groups, one group emerged as sort of an authority which took power in its hands, that is called Taliban. Taliban regime was not recognized by anybody except Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Pakistan. So that Taliban in 90s, we know it has created problems for US as well as India. So India's neighborhood, immediate neighborhood, became troubled because of these two developments. It changed India's regional security and political landscape. Right? Today's events may undo or fundamentally transform that revolutionary order. With the emergence of Islamic Republic of Iran from 79, the kind of alignments that we see, kind of equations that we see, right, continued for a few decades, right? To be very precise, 3, 4 decades. And after 4, 4.5 decades, now something has happened, very dramatic rather, right? And whether Iran's regime would survive or not, the regime that created those equations is on the verge of collapse now. Whether it will collapse or not, we have to wait for it. But nevertheless, it has disturbed all those equations. So the kind of instability, the kind of uncertainty that India faced with these two developments happening in the Middle East, that is Iranian revolution and Soviet intervention in Afghanistan, similar kind of situation is there because of US and Israel's uh, attack on Iran. And that is what Siraj Aman is pointing to. We have to now orient our foreign policy according to the kind of transformation that is coming after killing of Ayatollah Khomeini, right? So Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini we talked about. Now Ayatollah Ali Khomeini, right? Let us talk about briefly his role and legacy. The one who was killed in this attack. Let us talk about him, his background. So Ali Khomeini, the first one was Ruhollah Khomeini, right? Ali Khomeini became president when Ruhollah was there as supreme leader. So Ruhollah Khomeini was supreme leader and Ali Khomeini was president from 1981 to 1989. He became supreme leader in 89 and up to 2026 he continued as supreme leader of Iran. He succeeded Ruhollah Khomeini after his death. So from 1989, Iran has been ruled by Ayatollah Ali Khomeini, right? For 45 years, he dominated Iran's internal and external politics to a large extent. There are other things as well. We are going to talk about this. Under Ali Khamenei's leadership, internal dissent was crushed, and that is one reason why we see in some parts of Iran people were celebrating the fall of Khomeini. In other part, they were mourning the fall of Khomeini. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps expanded, IRGC. Now, that is a crucial deep state in Iran. We need to understand this, and everyone should try to understand the concept of deep state, right? So, Khomeini is supreme leader. There is a committee of clerics, and there is IRGC. Gradually, IRGC expanded itself domestically, right? In terms of consolidating power, Iran built the axis of resistance. When this happened, why, we would talk about that as well. That analysis as also I have included. We are just looking at what happened under Ayatollah Ali Khomeini's regime, right? Axis of resistance emerged, which includes Hamas and Hezbollah, Houthis, etc. Right? Regional proxy networks were institutionalized, and these were the proxies of Iran. These are the proxies of Iran, Hamas and Hezbollah particularly, right? Hamas in Israel, Palestine rather, and Hezbollah in Lebanon. His killing does not automatically mean regime collapse. That is very important observation, right? As far as Sirajamon is concerned, his killing does not automatically mean regime collapse, because Islamic Republic is deeply entrenched institutionally. If Islamic Republic would have been dependent on the personality of Khomeini alone, probably regime change would have been much more easier task. But under him, the kind of consolidation that has happened in the last 45 years, the institutionalization of power, right, that makes Islamic regime entrenched one. So it would not be easy to overthrow it, right? Now, having talked about Ruhollah Khomeini, having talked about Ayatollah Ali Khomeini, let us talk about role of IRGC, which is very important factor as far as the political architecture of Islamic Republic is concerned, right? Deep state that we're talking about. This brings us to central power structure in Iran. There's no doubt about that. When you discuss IRGC, you are coming to the central power structure of Iran, the core of Iranian political power. According to scholar Ramin Jahanbegloo, the IRGC is the true decision-making center of Islamic Republic. Jahanbegloo clearly says Ayatollah Khomeini is more like a supreme leader who doesn't pay attention to day-to-day governance and administration. And day-to-day governance administration, that power is in the hands of IRGC. It was established in 79. IRGC has now evolved into a military organization, political elite network, and economic conglomerate. Please understand, any political power is power only when it has got military power under its control and economic power under its control, right? Political power comes from support of the people, that you can call it legitimacy, right? But you also need military power and economic power. Just to explain this point, Pakistan civilian government does not enjoy these two powers. In fact, military is very powerful. It controls the civilian power, and that is why the political power in Pakistan looks like important, right? And Islamabad looks like important. Rawalpindi looks more powerful because military is dominant institution and military controls economy in Pakistan. So now look at the consolidation of power under IRGC. It has got military power. It has got political power through political elite network. It also has got economic power through control over economic conglomerate, right? So that's the reason as to why IRGC becomes a very, very powerful factor as far as Iran is concerned, Iranian political architecture is concerned. That is why the kind of hope that Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu have, that with elimination of Khomeini, the entire structure will collapse. It doesn't look like so. This structure is going to continue, right? Looks like it is going to continue. IRGC controls major state contracts, strategic industries, security apparatus, everything, and that gives them all the elements of power, right? Former IRGC commanders have occupied top positions. So now IRGC has penetrated into the political positions as well, right? For example, Mohammad Ahmadinejad, the president of Iran, was actually member of IRGC, was the commander of IRGC. Likewise, Mohammad Bagher Kalibaf, parliament speaker, also belongs to IRGC. That's how IRGC is a deep state. It controls the institutional infrastructure of Iranian politics. Jahan Beglu argues that clerical oversight has weakened and that the IRGC operates with minimal constraint. Very important observation. You should mention such kind of points. Jahan Beglu has observed very clearly that you have removed Khamenei, but the real power is in the hands of IRGC. And that's why removal of Khomeini may not lead to regime change, right? So IRGC operates with minimal constraint, and role of Khomeini is limited. So it is confined to clerical oversight, not the actual decision making. So this makes regime change extraordinarily complex. Very important kind of observation by Jahan Begli, right? Now let us talk about possible political scenarios in Iran. Uh, Please understand, these are all sort of educated predictions by different scholars. We really don't know in what direction Iran would head henceforth. But let's look at the possibilities. According to analysts by Subhajit Roy and Suzanne Meloni, right, three scenarios exist. There could be three possibilities. Number one, regime continuity. Because, as Jahan Beglu rightly pointed out, the regime is entrenched, it may continue, even though the supreme leader has been removed. Assembly of expert. This is what I was talking about. 88 clerics. Supremacy is this. May appoint successor. Assembly of experts may appoint successor, right? To Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. That is one possibility. Loyalist cleric likely. From among those clerics, the most loyalist may become successor to Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Possible collective leadership model. Another possibility is I one possibility somebody may be appointed as supreme leader as successor to Khomeini. Another possibility is possible collective leadership model. These 88 clerics may work as supreme leaders. That is another possibility within the first possibility. Second possibility, military takeover. IRGC may consolidate formal power. So far, IRGC was controlling formal power informally. That is called deep state. It may come forward now as actual state. That is another possibility. Ali Larijani discussed as possible figure. So some scholars say that maybe Ali Larijani from IRGC may become the most important figure as far as the political power of Iran is concerned. Institutionalization of military dominance. This could be an outcome as far as instability in Iraq is concerned after the attacks. Third possibility, regime collapse, which has been the objective signaled by Donald Trump. But that looks like a third possibility, a little bit remote possibility, right? It may happen, we are not denying that, but it depends on number of conditions, right? So what it requires, I'm saying that it is a remote possibility. If it has to become real possibility, it requires armed domestic opposition. Subhajit Roy and Meloni clearly say that these are the requirements: armed domestic opposition. So far, that has not been seen, or maybe that has been crushed by the IRGC. Logistical and possibly foreign support. Uh, any kind of armed revolution, armed opposition by civilian population might be crushed by IRGC unless it is supported logistically and maybe militarily and financially from a foreign power. And you need alternate leadership. In order to lead the people, in order to lead a revolution against IRGC, you need effective leadership. So, unless these three conditions develop, regime collapse seems unlikely for now. Now, if you talk about alternative leadership, there is one option, Raza Pahlavi, who belongs to the Pahlavi monarchy dynasty, right? But the problem is he is in exile, and exile figures lack sufficient legitimacy within Iran. There would be a huge question mark on to what extent people may accept them as leaders. History suggests regime change is easier to declare than to execute. We have a number of examples, right? Iraq, we have Afghanistan, right? More often than not, the attempts at regime change have failed. In case of Iran, it looks more likely that it may fail, right? Because of the reasons that we discussed. Now, let us talk about what is American strategy so far. Clemens Chai says that we need to discuss as to whether American strategy is diplomacy or a deception, right? Let's try to understand what his analysis says. Clemens Chai argues that US diplomacy functioned as diplomatic ruse. It is deception, he says. It's a ruse, right? What are the key points as far as Clemens Chai's analysis is concerned? US amassed major military presence since January. If US is amassing military presence since January, why US got into talks through Oman with Iran in February? That means talks was a ruse. sort of a plea just to show the things that we are ready for the compromise. So, keeping Iran unaware of their preparation to attack and then suddenly attacking. That is how Clemens Chai analyzes American strategy. Nuclear negotiations concluded in Geneva on 26th February may have provided a cover. It's a deception, it's a ruse. Talks was only a cover to cover up the military preparation that US was undergoing since January, right? And Geneva talks, which we are talking about, I have pointed that out in our earlier discussion, that was mediated through Oman. Trump said he was not thrilled, right? After the talks, he said he was not thrilled, even as Omani mediators claimed significant progress. So Oman was in darkness, Iran was in darkness, and Trump was preparing for the attack, maybe along with what maybe it was certainly with Benjamin Netanyahu, right? These two were conspiring, and they used talks as cover, most probably, according to Clemens Chai. Omani foreign minister declared to have cracked the problem with Tehran agreeing to zero uranium stockpiling. At that time, when the talks were concluded, Omani foreign minister was quite optimistic. He said, "We have tackled the problem. We have a breakthrough now in hand, and Iran has agreed not to stockpile uranium, that is nuclear fuel." Right. So American diplomacy was a ruse. Similar patterns seen in Operation Midnight Hammer in June 2025. Right. Iranian nuclear sites attacked after five rounds of negotiations. After rounds of negotiations, Iranian nuclear sites were attacked in June 2025. Similar kind of pattern can be seen in this case as well. This raises an important theoretical question. What has happened so far? And the kind of analysis Clemencha has given of the American strategy, it raises an important theoretical question. What is that? Is coercive diplomacy being replaced by preemptive regime targeting? Right? So either you go for coercive diplomacy or you go for regime change. Now the increasing preference looks like this one: preemptive regime targeting. But that's a theoretical question. Scholars may debate in coming years, right? It is yet to be settled. This answer is yet to be settled, but it looks like this is becoming now a norm as far as global politics is concerned. Next topic: Iran's strategic retaliation. We talked about American strategy. Let us talk about Iran's strategic retaliation rather. That has been very interesting, very interesting, right? How a weak state should counter a strong state. This was one topic that has been in discussion since ancient times, whether it was Kautilya or Thucydides. They have talked about in ancient Greece and ancient India how a weak state can counter a strong state. Look at how Iran has done that, right? So far. Samriddhi Vij, another scholar, argues. I told you in the beginning that generally I go for 3, 4 articles and then I get a crux of it. So Samriddhi Vij argues Iran launched Operation Truthful Promise 4 to counter American Operation Roaring Lion, right? Swift, calculated, deliberately targeted. Swift, calculated, deliberately targeted. So complete clarity, despite removal of the supreme leader, that clearly indicates the power lies in the hands of IRGC, right? A premeditated strategy, strike where maximum global economic damage can be inflicted. Doesn't matter how American strategy unfolded. They covered their military preparation with the talks. Iran was anticipating. It is very clear because the way they have responded, it looks like it was premeditated. It was already thought about. Very precision kind of response we see from Iran, right? Iran targeted Dubai deliberately. Why? Why? Because they wanted to threaten the nexus of global capital. And we know how sensitive US is because most of global capital is American capital. So if we attack Dubai, that is indirect attack on US economic power, right? Send markets into panic and coerce UAE to pressure Washington. So if UAE comes in trouble economically, UAE may pressurize Washington. We are your ally, right? And you are putting us in economic trouble, right? Dubai operated on assumption so far. So far, Dubai has operated on assumption, UAE rather. Economic prosperity creates strong incentive for geopolitical stability. And that has been the liberal position, right? Neoliberal position as far as PSIR analysis is concerned. That economic prosperity may bring what? Geopolitical stability. But that assumption now has received a setback. Recent escalations exposed inherent vulnerability of economically crafted stability. When there are ambitious leaders, over ambitious leaders, when there is power mongering, war mongering nature, right? The economically crafted stability becomes vulnerable. Asymmetric actor Iran. There's no doubt about that. Iran is asymmetric actor. See, I'm not pointing to everything that I have mentioned here. The kind of words that we're using in the art in this entire write-up, asymmetric actor, economic prosperity as strong incentive for geopolitical stability, neoliberal argument. So this is theoretical content that I'm bringing deliberately, and PSI students should note it. GS students may focus on the simplified analysis, right? So asymmetric actor Iran facing acute domestic strain, overwhelming external attacks. Iran is asymmetric in the sense compared to US, it's a weak power, right? And US is very strong power, strong and weak kind of conflict that is called asymmetric warfare. So asymmetric actor Iran facing acute domestic strain and overwhelming external attacks because there has been opposition to the regime from within Iran, right? And there's attack from outside. Now that's the kind of challenge that Iran faces. So fight for regime survival became very important. Right now, Iran is fighting for regime survival, and any country when it fights for regime survival, it uh, sort of mobilizes all the resources that they have at their disposal for ensuring regime survival, and that makes cost benefit calculations collapse. So you don't think about cost benefit now. You only think about how to survive. That is what has happened with Iran. Incentives of economic deterrence evaporate. When regime survival becomes top priority, right? I'm least bothered about economic deterrence. You do whatever you want. You put sanctions, you target my economy, I would in turn target you. So that's how Iran is responding, right? The core argument is of Samruddhi Vij, the scholar. Economic deterrence fails against existential threats. When there are existential threats, economic deterrence does not work. Deterrence is uh, uh, with some kind of threat, rather the fear of threat, you prevent somebody from doing something that is harmful to you. So now, so far, economic deterrence was working against Iran, but with this attack, regime survival becoming top priority, economic deterrence failed against existential threats. Akram Zoi's closing cycles framework. This is another important analysis. Akram Zoi is another scholar. Closing cycles framework. Akram Zoi offers a structural geopolitical interpretation. Structural geopolitical interpretation, right? We talked about American strategy individually. We talked about Iran strategy individually. Now, looking at the entire picture, his analysis. He identifies two super cycles, two structures rather. First super cycle, Iran's geopolitical consolidation. Now you would get some answers to how Iran developed proxy network, right? US invasion of Iraq was seminal development for Iran to consolidate its power. US attacked Saddam Hussein's Iraq in 2003, and that entire war continued till 2011. And during this time, meanwhile, political networks of Iran got empowered. When US was focusing on Iraq, Iran developed its political network by creating proxies like Hamas and Hezbollah, right? Iran's land bridge to Mediterranean, Assad regime and Hezbollah. Please understand, very important. Um, Mediterranean region in Middle East, or the region which is on seashore, right? Israel, Palestine, Jordan, right? Lebanon. So these countries, that is called Levant region. That is called Levant region, and any kind of Iranian outreach to Levant region to have any kind of uh, intervention, say in Israel-Palestine conflict, was through Assad regime in Syria. So Syria was a sort of gateway to Levant region, right? So Assad regime and Hezbollah in Lebanon provided entry to Mediterranean region for Iran. While US was involved in Iraq, this was developed. Syrian civil war post 2012 enabled Iran to entrench itself in Levant. Syrian civil war to oust Assad regime earlier. Now he has been overthrown. Before Assad was overthrown, there was another attempt. At that time, Russia and Iran supported Assad and saved his regime. And in that entire instability, right, rather exploiting the instability, Iran entrenched itself in Levant region. 2015 JCPOA nuclear agreement. Hmm? Uh, see, joint cooperation plan of action, joint comprehensive plan of action, nuclear agreement between P5 plus 1, that is P5 and Germany and Iran, right? Possibility of partial integration into international order. Barack Obama took an initiative. P5, we know P5, US, UK, France, Russia, and China, and Germany. One, they had an agreement with Iran, according to which, briefly speaking, Iran would bring its nuclear establishments under IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, and Iran would not develop uranium, it would not enrich uranium beyond what is required for civilian use. So this was decided. And in return, the Western countries would lift economic sanctions in phased manner. So it created a possibility of reintegrating Iran into international order, which was isolated so far by Western sanctions ever since George Bush Jr. had put Iran under sanctions, right? But now everything had changed. This entire structure had changed. Meanwhile, Iran expanded its regional influence via land corridor to maintain. That is what we have discussed here, right? Okay. Second super cycle. What has happened now? This was super cycle that was existence in the decade of 2010s. Now everything has changed. All the equations have undergone change. Second super cycle is rapid strategic reversal. Rapid strategic reversal, right? US withdrawal from JCPOA agreement in 2018 in the first presidency of Donald Trump. He was responsible for all the disturbance that we are witnessing now. And maximum pressure policy by US, Donald Trump himself, right? Imposing sweeping sanctions on Iran. That made Iran, right, again, sort of aggressive. And in fact, that pushed Iran in the strategic arc of China and Russia, right? Abraham Accords strengthened Israel's position in Iran's immediate neighborhood because Arabic countries now started befriending Israel. So, strategic position of Israel increased, rather strengthened in Iran's immediate neighborhood. Now, Iran looked at it as existential threat. Post 2023 Israeli operations. These operations also were the reason as to why we are calling it a reversal, strategic reversal of this system, right? What has happened? What all things have happened? Israel's assassination of Hamas head Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran in July 2024. That's proxy of Iran. Second, degradation of Hezbollah, killing of Hassan Nasrallah in September 2024. Fall of Assad regime December 24. So entire structure, right, collapsed. The structure that was built, consolidated by Iran post US invasion of Iraq, Saddam Hussein को remove करने के बाद, that entire structure was collapsing in these years, right? Recently. Then Operation Midnight Hammer, I have talked about that earlier, strikes on nuclear sites in Iran. So last couple of years, we are already witnessing what is coming, right? And then eventual fall of Assad regime, I have mentioned it here. All these factors clearly indicate strategic reversal. So strategic consolidation of Iran in 2010s, strategic reversal from 2024, right? Iran's doctrine of strategic patience collapsed. So far, Iran was maintaining strategic mention that has collapsed because of US attack on Iran. The current war represents a regime fighting for its survival. Now, no strategic patience, no economic deterrence. We have to fight for the survival. That is the mindset in which now Iran finds itself. Let us talk about Gulf states. What are the consequences for Gulf states, right? So Mehdi Gulum has given an analysis of the implications for Gulf states as far as the current war is concerned. He calls it crossfire problem. Crossfire problem causing collateral damage to Gulf states. Gulf states have become collateral damage of this war, right? According to Mehdi Gulum. Iranian strike hit US bases in these countries. The conflict was between US, Israel on one hand and Iran on the other hand. Iran very tactically attacked US bases in these countries, right? US is out of reach as far as Iran is concerned, but it can target US based in this country. That was very interesting kind of war strategy. Bahrain, UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia, right? What are the risks in this entire escalation? Weak civil defense infrastructure causing increasing casualties. Because this country did not expect this kind of escalation, right? There was weak civil defense infrastructure. And these attacks have caused a number of casualties, the Iranian attack on these countries. Then sectarian mobilization. The Shia Sunni divide may increase, the rivalry may intensify, sectarian mobilization. And there are other sectarian mobilizations as well, like Kurdish sectarian mobilization as well, right? Political destabilization. Overall, the result of all these things would be political destabilization in the Middle East, right? So Gulf states face a narrowing path to de-escalation. What do we see today? Possibility rather. De-escalation seems unlikely, right? They have only two options: either remain passive or be drawn into the war. We have to wait for what would unfold in coming weeks, right? Okay, now let us talk about very important aspect of this war, that is energy geopolitics, right? Iran has closed Strait of Hormuz effectively, right? 20% of global oil passes through it. That's very important. One fifth of the global oil. Very important kind of consequence, right? 21-kilometer wide choke point. Hormuz is 21-kilometer wide choke point, controlled by Iran, right? Potential global energy shock. There would be energy shock in coming weeks. There's no doubt about that, right? This conflict intersects with, see, I have mentioned this in the last lecture, that is important developments. I'm repeating here with writing, with giving you in writing, that different conflicts in last few years are connected with what is happening right now. They intersect each other. What are those conflicts? Europe's ongoing war theater, that is in Ukraine, right? Afghanistan, Pakistan instability, Taliban Pakistan conflict, and global supply chain vulnerabilities. All these things are interconnected. Even Assad's regime collapse, right? So energy politics has now become central, and it will be at the center as long as this war goes on, right? Let us now talk about what are the implications for India as far as this conflict is concerned. India faces severe exposure because 9 to 10 million diaspora works in Gulf, and entire Gulf region is now politically and militarily unstable, insecure. India faces this major problem in terms of evacuating Indian people if needed, and what would be their prospects, job prospects, right? Remittances and all that, right? 38% remittances come from the region. India is a country which receives largest remittances in the world, and India's largest source of remittance happens to be Middle East. And if Middle East is pushed into conflict, it's difficult to really think about this, and that's an important component that comes to our economy. 60% energy imports come from this region as far as India's requirements are concerned. 50% oil and 70% LNG, right? So that is very important kind of energy threat to us, right? Any disruption in the energy supply chain would be catastrophic for Indian economy, argues Subhajit Roy. Subhajit Roy clearly says this, right? If anything happens that would disrupt the supply chain, right, that would be catastrophic for Indian economy. How do we respond to this? What is the strategic dilemma that we have? Strong ties with US, strategic partnership in the Gulf, limited leverage over Iran's internal development. All these things create handicaps for us. On one hand, we have strong ties with US. That's very important kind of aspect as far as countering Chinese hegemony is concerned in Asia, in South Asia, in Indo-Pacific. Right? We have to be with US, but we also have to be with other Gulf countries. We are having friendship ties with almost every country. Right? Iran is again crucial for us. I have discussed that in the last lecture. Iran is important from energy and connectivity perspective, right? But we have very less leverage as to what happens domestically in Iran. So we cannot really contribute in terms of shaping Iran's internal politics so that the entire conflict will be managed, right? So this is a strategic dilemma India faces. As C. Rajamohan suggests, India must reassess its strategic calculus. You should write like this, huh? We have to reassess the strategic calculus because there has been a lot of change in the equations, right? Um, those super cycles that we discussed, structural super cycles, right? Akram Zohri was talking about it. So that super cycle has ended. The first one, the second one, reversal has come in. Equations have changed. The entire structure, power structure, equations have underwent change. So in the change conditions, we have to reassess our strategic calculus, right? Limited capacity to influence the outcome of the conflict. C. Rajamohan very clearly states that India has got limited capacity. We cannot influence the conflict. We cannot influence the outcome, right? Prepare for the cascading effects. If you cannot control the problem, if you cannot solve the problem, if you cannot manage the problem, then be ready for the cascading effects. Prepare for the cascading effects. That is the clear suggestion coming from C. Rajamohan. Transitional justice and the future. Briefly, right? If regime change occurs, Jahan Beglu proposes third way. If regime change occurs, he says there could be a third way as well. What is that? Neither vengeance nor national amnesia. Vengeance, some kind of longing for sort of a counterattack, right? You want to take a revenge. That would be a feeling in Iran. Naturally, that feeling would be there. Our supreme leader has been killed, so we want to take revenge. That is one feeling. Dusra, second, national amnesia. Second possibility would be सब भूल जाओ, जो हुआ भूल जाओ, ये तो होने वाला है नहीं, right? So ये दोनों चीज़ों की जरूरत नहीं है. It is not required. जहाँ Beglu says these two things are not required. Then what is required? Judicial mechanisms allowing victim testimony. The regime that Trump sought to remove, right? That regime perpetrated injustice on Iranian people. We know that very well. So, what is required? Judicial mechanisms allowing victim testimony. If Iran wants to sustain its political system, it has to undertake this exercise. Allow victims of state crimes and abuses to tell their stories. At least let them take out their frustration. And if possible, go for national healing. How do we do that? Victim involvement in future process of transitional justice. There would be a transition if Iran wants to go on that path, right? This could be another third way, right? Neither regime continuation nor regime failure completely collapse. There could be a third way. That is what Jahan Beglu argues. So Jahan Beglu says that democracy requires reckoning with the past repression. It requires reckoning with the past. You recognize the past repression. You be sorry for that. You involve victims in the future process. That is the way to consolidate democracy, not the way what US did in case of Afghanistan, for example, right? Now, after having a detailed kind of analysis of what has happened, right, let us look at the concluding reflections. So, brief kind of summary, concluding summary, right? Very, very briefly. In a way, I'm giving you micro notes of what is happening, right? I'll try to make it a little bit more comprehensive in full sentences because that is what I think after looking at this full sentences. And you can prepare the micro notes from next week onwards, right? Core analytical insights. Leadership removal is not equal to regime change. Trump is trying to do this, remove the leader, top leader, and expect for regime change, regime collapse. That is not going to happen, at least in case of Iran, because it is institutionally entrenched regime. IRGC has got a decisive power in its hand. That's why it is decisive variable, and that would not allow regime collapse to happen. That is how it looks like as of now. External regime change historically has been unstable. Take example of Iraq. Take example of Afghanistan. This is conclusion. Economic deterrence has failed, no doubt about that. This fails especially when a state is fighting for regime survival. Gulf states precariously positioned. That's collateral damage, right? As far as this war is concerned, they are now dangerously positioned, right? Energy markets globally vulnerable, no doubt about that. This conflict has literally put that entire energy market into trouble. India highly exposed but limited in influence. We are very much exposed, but we don't have much, to control what is happening there, right? Final question for reflection: are we witnessing the end of 79 revolutionary order? Is it that this is going to end, or merely its most dangerous phase of adaptation? Maybe it may adapt, it may continue. These are two possibilities that we have to watch out for. All right, this is what I intend to discuss as far as detailed analysis of this conflict is concerned. At the end of this PDF, I have uh, created some questions based on this topic and model answers as well. I expect that you write answers first of this question without looking into the model answer given here, and then compare. That would be good practice for you. Thank you. Let's conclude this session here. I would come up with another session, right? That would have the third lecture of this week, third and final lecture of this week. That is special issue number 2, is about SEPA agreement. Just a moment. Yes, India Canada SEPA. That will be topic for the next lecture. Let's conclude this session here. Thank you.